Hi, my friends. Welcome. It is July 3rd, 2024, and we are gathered to kind of just be here for each other and discuss, um, what we've gone through and what we might go through. So, the last time we gathered and discussed was on Monday. Every Monday here at the Salt Circle, we discuss themes like codependency, enabling, dealing with a codependent person or an enabler, or just, handling life as someone who is affected by someone else's drug addiction, alcoholism, or dysfunction. So this week, we're going to kind of take a little bit of a change from that. And while still sticking in, what we rootedly believe, which is personal responsibility, mutual support, validation, non-judgment, authenticity, all that good stuff. This week, or every Wednesday at the Salt Circle, we're going to be discussing themes like death, dying, and bereavement. And to me, these are, things that are very closely intertwined. If you are codependent or an enabler, most likely you're that way, or you have someone in your life who has extreme irresponsibility. They take tons and tons of very risky behavior, or they're just not smart with their own lives. They're alcoholics, drug addicts, gamblers, hoarders, whatever the flavor of the month might be. If you have someone like that in your life, you might be visited with the themes like death, dying, and grief kind of sooner than you might expect, or in a different way than people around you. Death, dying, and grief. Bereavement is another word for grief, but death, dying, and grief are already kind of taboo topics in the American culture. We don't really talk about dying, or the process of dying, or what we think happens after death, or what we want to happen if we die. So to talk about these taboo themes through the variables of chaos, dysfunction, abuse, and addiction, it adds an extra layer of tabooness, or an extra, set of challenges for navigating that. So to me, codependency, dealing with someone else's addiction, and death, dying, and bereavement are kind of tethered. Uh, that is the thought. I'm sorry, I tend to ramble and rant, and it's a habit that I'm trying to, break. But so that's what this week is going to be about. It's going to be really discussing just introductory ideas or themes surrounding death, dying, and bereavement. Um, you know, Death and dying, as well as feeling grief after someone dies, are deeply intertwined aspects of the human experience, each carrying, significance and emotional weight. The significance can be psychological, cultural, societal, religious. There can be so many implications and so many positionalities that it's hard to navigate, or it's daunting to navigate when it's something you even think about. So let's simmer it down and kind of just, take smaller bites of this taboo, complex concept or theme or reality, whatever kind of word you want to put onto it. So, death. Death can be described as the stop of life, right? It's the end of biological function. that sustains an organism, whether it's a plant, an animal, a human, whatever. It's a universal phenomenon. Every single thing will die, one way or another, at one point or another, right? And it's a phenomenon that evokes such a wide range of emotions. And it evokes such wide beliefs or rituals across cultures, across individuals, across family groups, right? Dying. It's one of my not favorite words, but it's such a poignant word. When I was taking a thanatology course in college, they always said, if someone is dying, you have to say that they're dying, so it really gets the point across. You can't say, oh, they're going to pass on. Oh, they're taking the big sleep. Oh, they're no longer with us. They've died. They're dying. So that word always just was very dense in my head, in my vocabulary. But dying refers to the process leading up to death, obviously. Death is a process. Very, very rarely do you just fall over and that's it, you're dead instantly. Instantly, very rarely does that happen. And equally as, precious or rarely does it happen that you die in bed at the age of 99. Dying is usually something that we go through. It's a process, and it's often a complex process to be the outsider looking in at the dying person, or being the one who receives the diagnosis, the terminal illness, the realization that you are going to die and it's going to be sooner than you think, right? Dying can be sudden. It can be gradual. It almost always invokes a physical, emotional, and spiritual change. It's going to be accompanied by a variety of experiences like, pain, acceptance, reflection, anger, denial. Sometimes even a sense of welcomeness, a sense of peace, a sense of finally, which we can definitely get into later. And then of, death, dying, and bereavement, the last term being bereavement, it's a term that not a lot of people, really are familiar with, but it basically means grief. These words can be interchanged. And technically bereavement is a state of grief. Whatever. Who cares about the college technicalities of the definition? Bereavement is the mourning of a loved one. It is the active process of coping with the loss, and that can happen right after death. That can happen years after death. That can happen randomly. It's its own animal. It encompasses the emotional response to a loss, sadness, disbelief, anger, longing, sometimes relief. Talk about that later. Bereavement, grief is very personal. It's a very personal experience that varies greatly from person to person, and it can influence a person, their personality, their emotional state, their physical appearance, to really have your feelings manifest through sadness and grief and longing. That kind of is what bereavement is. So death, dying, and bereavement, I think, really kind of navigates the taboo that is death, dying, and bereavement. I can at least speak from personal experience. dealing with, drug addicts, users, and convicts living in the same house as someone who was actively dying, the complexity of navigating both those facets of the dysfunction. And I hard stop, just gonna leave it at that. Next point, moving onward, because we can't get stuck on one thing for too long. This is just the introductory and welcome video. Definitely check back next week, next Wednesday, for more videos specifically tailored to death, dying, and bereavement. We're definitely going to dive in more into, the meat of this. But just to get a good feel for the introduction of death, dying, and bereavement, I don't know if you're following the Discord. I have a Discord for the Salt Circle. And in Discord, the channel for death, dying, and bereavement, or for grief support, or just kind of exploring those feelings or those experiences, I call it the Dandelion Room. Like the flower, the little puffball flower. So definitely check it out. We'll have some more resources, articles, FAQs and things like that about this process, about this field of, study, if you want to call it. So definitely check it out. Everything that I speak about here will also, for the most part, end up on the Discord, maybe in an abridged version, or, some different type of media. But I definitely want to make sure that anyone has access to this information and this support, regardless of where you are in the death, dying, and bereavement, journey. But again, we're going to just kind of go over the basics, go over the introductory, the 101 level of this, especially because no one talks about it. This isn't taught in home ec, no one really knows what to do about dad in hospice until dad is in hospice, you know what I mean? So in this channel, or in, the Dandelion Room on my Discord, we really, want to explore how death is defined, first of all, across all disciplines, across biology, psychology, sociology, anthropology, just to get a full immersion of what it actually is. What is death? Because a lot of people probably don't really realize what that is, what it is for yourself and for others, on both sides of the coin, if you're going through it or if you're watching someone go through it. Also, with that, I think it's important to kind of look at the different cultures and historical periods and how they understood and ritualized death, and how it kind of leads us to where we are in present time, Another thing is the dying process. So kind of like how I touched upon earlier, is that, death can be sudden or it can be gradual. So I think it's important to kind of examine the physical and emotional stages of dying, including, if you are, someone who's actively going through the dying experience or the dying process, how to understand their pain, or what it is for pain management, palliative care. When someone says it's time to go to hospice, what does that mean? What is it to be a caregiver if hospice isn't an option? It's valid to feel certain things even if you're not the one with the terminal diagnosis. So this is going to be a place where we can all just kind of discuss multifaceted aspects of the dying process that we might not otherwise get to, and we can do it at least in an area that's not going to, discuss really heavily religion. Well, God this, Jesus that, whoever, whatever, what, where, why, when. Instead, it can just be like, this is my experience. This is what I'm going through. And that's enough. That is a complete sentence, and that is valid. What you experience is, regardless of your part in it, is valid. And I think in that, in having a voice and a perception that is valid in the dying process, whether it's your own or it's someone that, you're witnessing or caregiving for, it's the ethical considerations. And a lot of people don't really realize that there's a lot of political red tape or ethical barriers that kind of really like pop up when you actually get to them. So ethical dilemmas involving end of life care or uh resurrection, that's not a good word, but I can't think of another word, but if someone is terminal and they want to be euthanized, kind of depends on the state you want to be you live in. And physician assisted suicide is different than euthanasia, which is completely separate from the implications of life support, organ donation. What if it's a child? What if the parents are divorced? So there's a lot of complexities that are more than the emotional, physical, or family dynamic. A lot of it even comes from our society, our governments, and just how the world is. And I think it's important to at least have some blueprint of knowledge about those things before someone's actually dying. You know what I mean? At least take it from my experience. It's nice to have this information before you have to have this information. You know what I mean? Um, and kind of piggybacking off of that, there's ethical considerations, and then there's considerations for how we go through dying and bereavement. There's different theories to grief. There's renowned psychologists or sociologists, there are spiritualists, there's everyone that has their theory or their piece of insight into how we go through with this awareness and this impending knowledge that death is coming for someone or yourself. So, the theories of grief, because there's not so many of them, but there are enough of them that you can kind of either tailor it to yourself or like be able to pinpoint that's how I deal. That theory would work best for me because this seems the most congruent with my personality. And I think it's important to realize that it's not just the 5 stages of grief. There's so much more to grief, especially if you've been given that terminal diagnosis. Also, side note, I won't even get into the side note. We'll get into that another time. So, with that, grief and stuff like that, there's cultural variations, obviously. Not everything that I speak about here, I'm an American. I've lived in America my whole life. My cultural standpoint is limited to that of an American, for more or for less. So, to analyze how grief and bereavement are experienced and expressed differently across different cultures, different religions, different, political climates, I think it's interesting. I think it's very important to just kind of see the death, dying, and bereavement situation, the experience, to see it from a different positionality. I think it's important. It can give some real insight, if not to how you could be experiencing it, but maybe how you're experiencing it just plainly. Like, wow, that person acts this way. Why do I act this way? Is it yada, yada, yada? Who knows? But that's something that we can definitely delve into and discuss. And because of that, to see how many, different ways there are to see, deal with death, dying, and bereavement, there's an infinite amount of ways to receive support and, intervention. Intervention meaning different counseling techniques, support groups, communities, or different ways to deal with the grief, whether that is dealing with it while the dying person is still alive, with it when they've died, and how do you deal with it? What if you've been no contact? What if there is no body or funerary arrangements? What do you do? And to have the realization that you don't have to have a funeral, as an American knows it. There are so many other ways to honor someone's life, to handle this ending of a life, and to, really give yourself the ability to accept it, which I think is important, especially when you're talking about people who have a pagan or polytheistic belief system, because so much in America is geared towards Catholicism or the Judeo-Christian belief system, that to have the support and interventions of numerous, the multiplicity of other cultural beliefs, other perspectives, other positionalities from different sides of the world, from different religions, I think could be very beneficial. Sorry. My brain goes a million miles a minute, and then I start thinking a million different things. But especially, when it comes to death, dying, and bereavement, there's so much that goes into it. There's impacts on families, the impacts on communities, the social and cultural dimensions, the mourning processes, and how we deal with that based on where we live or who we're mourning with. There's spiritual and existential perspectives, religious and philosophical views pop up. And I think to have a place to really discuss that before they pop up is pretty important. It doesn't have to be taboo until it happens. We can talk about it. And especially if you're dealing with someone else's addiction, someone else's dysfunction, I think it's important that, you can at least come here and say, hey, yeah, they're an abuser, they're an addict, they might die, but I believe in the afterlife they will find peace. And that doesn't have to be rooted in any religion. That could just be your own personal belief. And it's safe to say that here, no matter what it is. And I think especially when dealing with someone else's addiction, trying to recover from codependency, it's hard to say things like that, especially, existential crises, the themes related to death, the mortality. It's hard, it's scary, but we can at least discuss that here, especially because it's not unique to any one person or group of people. Everyone will be experiencing this at some point, I think it's a shame that we don't talk about this sooner and we don't have more resources available. The contemporary issues are beyond what do you think happens when we die, or where are we going to bury them? It's really, in medical advances, if we're able to keep someone alive, should we? Is that, it gets very fuzzy, especially when you're in it, and it's hard to navigate those themes when you're in it and your emotions are running wild. There's legal issues, policy issues, the framework of government when it comes to life-ending decisions or advanced directives, legal rights. It's just, I want to cultivate a place where we can kind of discuss that, I don't know, maybe it's just because of my own experiences that I feel like we don't have to go through it alone. We really don't. Everyone has dealt with this or will deal with it. And to keep this information, gate kept, it just seems like such a disservice, especially to, people in the pagan community who are already, judged, misunderstood, and kind of left out of a lot of mainstream ceremonies or expectations, especially like, when my grandfather died, I didn't, the only option was to go to a church and bury him there. There was that or cremation. And there are more alternative funerary practices, but you need to know that. You need to have those resources. I don't know. That's kind of what I wanted to discuss when it came to Wednesdays on the Salt Circle. Especially, like I said earlier, it's just when you're dealing with someone else's addiction or you're codependent or you're enabler, this really might come up sooner rather than later. And at least from my personal experience, I would love to help anyone if I could, especially with all this BS. It's not being BS, but it's silly that it's not discussed more. I mean, if you really think about it, what will you do when your spouse or parents are actively dying? How will you get them out of their bed to help them to the bathroom? Or if you need to change their clothes, like, how do you roll them over? What if you're just a girl? How do you pick up a 300-pound man? Like, what if someone's stealing all the morphine because they have an addiction? But the person who that's their morphine, they're blaming you because they have their own enabling issues. So I think it really gets interwoven, the two channels, the codependency and living with someone else's dysfunction and being able to navigate death, dying, and bereavement in a way that is healthy and conducive to, continued mental health. So I would love to hear your feedback on this. I would love to hear what, everyone has to say about death, dying, or bereavement, or how it ties into certain, aspects of your own life. Like maybe you have a sibling who is very ill or very in need of medical assistance, and you are looked at as the future caregiver, or you have, a relative who is a severe alcoholic, who is in end stage, liver failure, who still drinks. And you have to clean up the bloody shit as they waddle from the fridge to get a beer to the bathroom to puke. Like how does it all intersect, Like I said before, death and dying is such a taboo topic, especially in the United States, that when death and dying is mixed and amalgamated with such chaos and dysfunction, what do you really do, Especially because if you're born and bred and raised in dysfunction, you think it's normal, I don't know. So, anyway, I just really wanted to, yeah, get all this together on a Wednesday, and I do apologize if it's ramshackled, hodgepodge, thrown together. I had so much I wanted to talk about, and I just kept talking, and I don't even know if any of it made sense, so I apologize if it doesn't. I do. I really do appreciate you listening and taking in everything that I've had to say about, this channel and every Wednesday what we're going to be discussing. Of course, through the lens of pagan multiplicity. I can't guarantee that's going to be legitimate rituals and fucking naked moon dances, sacrificing a chicken, you know what I mean? But I can promise that this is at least going to be a place that we can have safe discussions that are without judgment, where you can really find reprieve and rest and respite and all those other R words. Because I really feel like, it's necessary. We need it. Without it, what do we really have? Um, yeah. And I hope that if anyone is dealing with, themes like death, dying, and bereavement, you feel comfortable enough to reach out to me because you don't have to go through it alone, you know? I know life, especially in America, likes to pretend like this is never going to happen, but I'm here for you. And when it does happen, or if it's happening, I'm still here for you. Just as I'm sure a lot of people in the pagan community would be here for you. So I would love to hear what you have to say about just your overall impression about this stream, this podcast, this recording, this live, I don't know what to call it. I don't know. But I would love to hear what you have to say. And I would love to also see you on the Discord where I have some more content, some more essays, and some more blurbs about being codependent, handling someone else's alcohol addiction, drug use, whatever, as well as dealing with, death, dying, and bereavement. Um, Definitely would like to hear what you think, and I would definitely love to see you guys here next week. On Monday at 8 p.m., I'll be discussing, codependency and navigating someone else's addiction. But next Wednesday will be another discussion of death, dying, and bereavement. So definitely would love to see you there. I definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. This is just the introductory and welcome video, so I definitely hope I answered any questions or helped you realize, that you can come and hang out with me at the Salt Circle and we can galvanize ourselves through our healing journey, through our journey of acceptance, through this complexity of, life's challenges, especially when it comes to death, dying, and bereavement. No one should have to go through that alone. Oh God, no one should have to go through that alone. But yeah, thank you guys for hanging out. I hope this video was good and I hope you like it. Either way, drop me a comment, tell me what you think, like, subscribe, follow, hide on a carrier pigeon. I have no idea. But definitely appreciate you and your time, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Definitely check back with me later, okay? Bye.